Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I love dogs, and I love to bring dogs and their handlers on this show as often as possible. And I was fortunate enough to meet a woman who is doing amazing work uh, with a pretty amazing dog. And I thought you needed to meet her, needed to hear her story, and needed to know more about her organization. Kate Klasen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm happy to be here.
So your organization is called Bishop's Mission. So who's Bishop?
Bishop, if I can get him to stand up for me. Bishop, up. So this is Bishop, and I say he's the founder of Bishop's Mission. He is my companion, my partner in crime. But Bishop is he's trained at the service level, so he's trained to recognize PTSD. And we started working with first responders. And so that started the mission.
I love it. And he is such a beautiful dog. But first, I got to find out more about you. I got to ask you the question I ask everybody who is in law enforcement. And you have a great story. Why'd you become a cop?
To defy the rest of the family.
I love that you're such a rebel, Kate.
My whole family were on the fire department. I'm the only one in my family that was law enforcement. And I actually had started in 911 dispatch, and I was a dispatcher for a few years and decided to go on the other side of the radio and finish out my career in patrol. So it almost kind of was one of those things where I just kind of fell into it. It wasn't like I grew up thinking I wanted to be a cop. I actually got my EMT license, and I really thought that I was going to go on the paramedic side. But the 911 dispatch job was for a police department, and that started becoming my surroundings. And so I just stuck with it.
I just love that story. And so as a 911 operator and a police officer, you saw the fun side of that job, but of course, you also saw the difficult side of that job. And cops, as well as firefighters, paramedics, EMS workers, are of course involved in so much trauma. They see and are involved in so many critical incidents, and it affects our mental health, doesn't it?
Oh, big time. And I think for me, at least in my experience, I did almost 20 years. And then, like I said, I grew up in a first responder household that they didn't recognize mental health awareness. And so there was a lot of self-medication that I grew up seeing in that field. So I didn't realize that I was being affected by it. It didn't until I started working with Bishop and started working with the trainer, and the trainer said to me, this is what he is supposed to look for PTSD. That's when I said, I do some of that stuff. Do I have PTSD? Because it just never dawned on me that I was being affected by the job.
So how does a dog detect post-traumatic stress? I mean, they can't walk up to somebody and have them fill out a questionnaire or ask them questions. So what does a dog do?
They do their form of going around and asking questions by using their sense of smell. So he's taught to recognize certain fidgets, like being fidgety, shaking your leg a lot. That's a form of anxiety, to shake your leg. So he'll he'll see that, and he'll actually come up and alert if he sees somebody doing that. But really, ultimately, it's more of a sense of smell. So from my understanding from working with the trainers, when it comes to medical issues, as far as like diabetes and seizures and that type of stuff, we actually give off a smell that's more sweet. When it comes to PTSD and other mental health stuff, we actually give off something that is more of a sour smell. So it's not necessarily that they're going, hey, you've got PTSD. They just know from the pheromone that something's going on with you.
Is that from cortisol or what substance do we give off?
For the PTSD, I think it is the cortisol. Yeah. Um, and yet at the same time, what I've noticed with him, even though that was the core of what he was trained for, I have been around people that have had the medical side of things happen. I've had students that were diabetic. I've got somebody that comes into my shop right now and she's got POTS. He's able to sense that and he'll still work on them even if he smells that as well. So I feel like once they're in the service world, they may be able to pick up on more than just what they've been trained to do.
So, how did you decide to start Bishop's mission? And in fact, how did you hook up with Bishop?
Yeah, that's a story for for another podcast. But I actually had started with another therapy. Well, they weren't therapy at the time. I started with another nonprofit organization that wanted to start a therapy program. And when I was put in charge of that, started working with it, and that's when they came back and said that they didn't want to do that program anymore. But I was already kind of getting the momentum going. And so I thought, well, then I'll start Bishop's Mission. It was during that time period that I wasn't really looking for another dog. Bishop, long story short, was actually supposed to go to my mom and dad. So they were ready to rescue another dog. And I talked them into getting the Dalmatian, knowing that I was going to be maybe using him for therapy work. And they decided that at the last minute, this dog isn't going to be right for them. And I just, my gut wouldn't let it go. I knew that I still had to go pick him up. And I even said to my parents, I said, well, I'm still going to go and I'm still going to pick him up. Whether he's supposed to be in my house or yours, I don't know, but he needs to be here. So I went, it was a 12-hour drive to go get him. So I went and picked him up, adopted him, came home. And that's when everything just kind of fell into place that he was going to stay mine. And once I decided that I was going to keep him, that's when I started working with him as far as training and knew that I wanted him to be more on the service level than just therapy level.
Now, Dalmatians they're very smart. They're visually appealing. But again, we're used to seeing them either in Disney cartoons or sitting on a fire truck. And but how did you determine that this rescued Dalmatian was smart enough and had the aptitude for doing the work that you guys are doing now?
Well, it was funny because I grew up with a Dalmatian, kind of ironic, right? So I grew up with a Dalmatian. And when we were sitting here thinking about doing the therapy program, to me, all I kept thinking was, what would be a good dog to represent that would want people to come up and see the dog? Um, and I didn't want to do a German Shepherd because I thought German Shepherd may actually provoke some PTSD depending on what the situation was. And that's when I thought, well, what about a Dalmatian? Because the Dalmatian that I grew up with was awesome. And I contacted different rescues. And when I contacted this rescue, I told them exactly what I was looking for. And that's when they came back to me and said, we think we might have one that might fit what you're looking for. And when I got him back, his story is actually kind of amazing, but the rescue actually handed me a packet, and in this packet was everything about Bishop that was from the previous owner. So they spelled out everything and spelled out all the training that he had had up to that point. So even though he wasn't certified for canine good citizen or any type of, obedience thing, he had everything already to go. So I started taking him to the training classes and the trainers were evaluating him. And right off the bat, we were able to, without really taking him through too many classes, certify him for Canine Good Citizen. Once I started working with him from that point, then he got his advanced Canine Good Citizen and then just kept working with him. And I there's the only thing that I can say about Bishop, I think he was born to do this job because sometimes he just picks up on it and he surprises me. It's very fascinating to watch him work. But I have another Dalmatian that's in training right now, and she's very smart too. She picks up on a lot of things, but there's just something about Bishop that I just think that he was born to do this, and we were meant to come together to do Bishop's mission.
How does a beautiful purebred dog like Bishop end up in a rescue?
So oddly enough, I was able to talk with the previous owners, and they just had they got him during COVID. And so they were able to be at home with him when they first got him. And then once things started opening back up, they had to go back to work and just didn't have the same amount of time and didn't think that that was fair to him. So that's when they went ahead and released him.
Well, that was so fortunate for you and
Yeah.
for him. So once you got him, up and running, if you will, trained for the type of work you're doing, what does a day in the life of Kate and Bishop look like for first responders?
So what we do is I went and got trained through first responder trauma counselors. I did their peer support academy. Then I came back to Arizona and got certified for critical incident stress management. And so what I'm trying to build with Bishop's mission is to be a third-party peer support team that can offer animal assistance. So if the department doesn't have a dog or they don't have a program, or a lot of times now the departments do have their own programs, but sometimes the dog is tied up on other things. So what I'm trying to do is build a group that the departments know that they can call. They have reliable handlers. Um, I love therapy groups. I think therapy groups definitely have their place and purpose. But I also understand that coming into a first responder type incident, um, you know, Mrs. Jones with Fluffy might not necessarily understand that. And sometimes, and I've heard feedback in my journey here that there have been handlers that don't have that type of response background and they go and they want to help out. But then when they hear certain things, it actually was a little bit stressful for them. That because
Right. Very often, first responders end up counseling the counselor, don't they?
yeah, yeah. And so this is where, as a former first responder myself, coming in with a dog that knows how to recognize PTSD, a responder that's had PTSD, that we get called in to help out and assist with critical incident debriefings. I can, as a handler, now read the room. So if they're doing their debriefing, it's beneficial, number one, that I'm there as peer support so they can come talk to somebody if they're not comfortable talking to somebody within their department. Now they have a third party that they can come talk to. But with Bishop, as they're doing the debriefing, I at least can understand and intuitively know how to read the room because I'm looking at it as a first responder. So do I want Bishop to sit here and go and, as somebody is venting out about the incident that happened and have Bishop like go up there and, start bothering this person? No, I'm going to pull back and I'm going to wait and I'm going to read the room and have him go when it's appropriate. So I think that that's also an added benefit of having handlers that were also first responders to go in as a third party to recognize what's going on and then utilize the animal assistance properly.
Talk about the importance of peer support when it comes to first responders, because that's something, it's relatively new in the law enforcement space, especially, and not every um, law enforcement leader is a fan of peer support. Explain what it is and why it's so effective.
Yeah, and I don't understand why they're not a fan, though at the same time, I know we have some generational differences as well and different understanding because if I talk about Bishop's mission with my dad, he still doesn't necessarily understand it because to him, this is part of the job and you just deal with it. But I also know too, as when I was a first responder, my family had moved to Arizona. So I didn't have family to come home to. I didn't have family to spend holidays with. I was divorced. I didn't have a husband. I never had kids. So I actually went through my career being alone. Yes, I dated other responders, but what I found with that is, at least the ones that I was with, it became more of a competition. Like, my day wasn't so bad because this is what my day was. And so I was still a lot of times being disregarded. And I think that is a major feeling when it comes to being a first responder. You just feel like you're not being heard um, within the department or whatever the surroundings may be. And I think that's where I come from, a viewpoint of coming into this. My whole point of doing it is to know that you don't have to be alone. Like, I felt like I was alone. I didn't have anybody to really turn to. I felt and knew at that point in time, because I was patrol in Illinois. Illinois wasn't very receptive to going and getting help. And if they found out, then you would be considered unfit for duty. So there was this challenge, because where's the outlet? Where do you go? And you need some sort of outlet. And so my outlet at that point in time was working out, but unfortunately that made me beat my body up. And so I'm paying the price. So with Bishop's mission, I think peer support is really important, because we don't always necessarily need to go to a therapist. Sometimes you just need to vent and let it out and say, hey, it bothered you, because we have to recognize that we're still human beings. And so with Bishop's mission and being a third party, you might not feel comfortable within your own department to go talk to somebody, but hey, we're here. We're here, and you don't have to do this alone. I'm here to listen to you. Bishop's here if you need him, that you can come in, you can talk to him. You don't even have to talk to me. However you need to release that, I think is really important.
And post traumatic stress doesn't have to be a chronic forever condition, does it?
No. And that's what I learned. So when I left, that was an experience within itself, because when you leave, they don't, you think that you're still going to have your friends that backed up each other on the street, and you put your life in each other's hands, and then you leave and you're done, you're gone. They don't really necessarily keep in touch with you. That's a lot to process. um, and I would like Bishop's mission to be another outlet for retirees that are going through that aspect of it as well. Maybe be peer support even for those that aren't on the job anymore. There's a lot of resources I find that are out there that are for responders that are on the job. I don't see as many resources for the ones that are now off the job. And I think that's just as important to recognize, because PTSD doesn't just go away. You can go through different modalities, you can deal with different aspects of it, but does it ever actually 100% go away? No. And so having a third party peer support to go in there and talk about that, I think is beneficial on many different levels. But no, I don't think it's something that you have to live with it in a hypervigilant state forever. You can definitely use different modalities and deal with it. But every once in a while, things come up, and you know what? That's okay. That's what we're here for.
How do you think the current atmosphere that we're living in 2025 when it comes to law enforcement, almost 5 years of really cops especially being demonized, being vilified, um, what have you seen? How does that affect police officer mental health?
When I was on the department, I also taught at the police academy. And before I left, you can see the dynamic of politics changing. And I even said at that point, you're setting these kids up to fail, because they're afraid to do their job, because now they're being watched. Now, they can be considered for murder. Now there's all this extra pressure, um, that sometimes that I'll sit back and I'll see some of these videos that are happening nowadays, on top of talking to some of the responders out there. I think it makes them hesitate a lot. And so therefore that hesitation makes the outcome a little bit different. And I think that actually affects them a little bit more, because it was bad enough at the time, because every single critical incident that you have, and I'm going to say I'm speaking for myself on this one. This might not be for every responder, but I find that it's a very common thing. Every single critical incident you have, you go home and all you do is replay that in your head over and over and over again, and think to yourself, what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? Um, and then that's when, you know, the department comes and now they do these debriefings and you can learn from it, but that still doesn't take away, like, what could I have done differently? And that's where I think peer support can step in and really help out with that. And with the atmosphere that we have nowadays, and being a little bit more hesitant, and everybody relying on cameras a little bit more, I can see where those thought processes are probably really, really going strongly in their heads. What could I have done differently? Because something may not have been caught on the camera. That doesn't mean that it didn't necessarily happen, but that's the atmosphere that we're in nowadays. If it wasn't on camera, then it didn't happen, right?
When you walk into a critical incident debriefing, and for the people listening and watching who aren't involved in the first responder world, it's basically after some kind of a critical incident, again, whether it's an officer involved shooting or a homicide, a child involved death. I mean, there's all kinds of things, a terrible fire. There's all kinds of things that are that we want to have everybody get together and process it. When you are going into one of those and you walk in with Bishop, um, what do you see when in that initial reaction? I'm so curious.
It's funny because a lot of times when I walk into a department for the very first time, it's usually kind of like, who's this person? And although they're questioning me, they look at him and they're like, oh, and they come up and they'll start petting him. They'll start talking to him. They afterwards will come up to me and say that they're really happy that he was there. When there's been a couple of departments that utilize this more frequently, and I've gotten the feedback. It's so funny. There's couple of times where I don't really get a whole lot of feedback, but then I was at a fundraiser and some of the responders were coming up to me and they're like, oh, Bishop, you know, this was so awesome. He was so great. He's the best dog. He was in our debriefing. And so it makes me realize how much he actually affects that, because I don't get the feedback at that point in time. And now I've actually gotten the feedback that they actually show up to the debriefing because they know that Bishop's going to be there.
I love that. That's awesome. Speaking of fundraising, dogs aren't cheap, and neither is doing a program like you're doing, because you travel around. You obviously are available to respond. You have a website. You do training. All of that. Um, how do you fundraise, and what are those needs? What does all that look like?
It's a lot. It's a lot. And really, quite honestly, I am still trying to learn what our best fundraising avenue is going to be. Right now, I've been doing individual donations, and that's where I want the departments to know and understand, and for the responders to know and understand everything that we do is being sponsored for them. I don't want them to not feel that they can reach out and utilize our services because of budget concerns. If you want a dog at your debriefing, we're here for you. And so right now I'm doing more individual fundraising, but hopefully 2025 and the years ahead, we can actually come up with what is going to be our best fundraising options. One of the things that I also want to establish too is a veterinary emergency fund for the service dogs of first responders and veterans. And so I'm really trying to get fundraising off the ground to get that established, only because Bishop had an emergency. And as I'm in the vet office, they handed me the estimate of what needed to be done. And I joke around and I say that was the price of a new car, but he was worth every minute of it. And this is my first service dog. So I now understand that bond where it's much different than it is with just your pet dog. And some of these responders and veterans, this is what helps keep them going day by day. So I would really like to help them out if they're in that situation where they need emergency funds, to not have to make that decision to put the dog down if we can help them financially. So that's the other part of the fundraising that we're trying to get off the ground.
I love that. You're just doing amazing work. Kate, where can people find you and Bishop, social stuff, website? Give us all of it.
So you can find us on social media through Facebook. We've got Instagram and TikTok for however long that's going to be around. But you can find us under Bishop's Mission at those sites. And then my website, www.bishopsmission.org. And on the website is also a contact page. And those are probably the best ways to get a hold of us.
Outstanding. Kate, Klasen, and Bishop, we can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.